Who wants democracy? When do you want democracy? Who would you like to talk about it? Goodman!
Wow, what an introduction.
Wait. This one.
What an introduction. First the sirens, and then Zoe. Wow. Hi. I'm Amy Goodman from Democracy Now!, a daily grassroots, global, unembedded, independent, international investigative news hour. And we are about to celebrate our 30th anniversary, which is absolutely astounding. But which is also why I'm here, but not to talk about the daily show that we do, but to talk about a new film that's been made about Democracy Now! Now, I want to point out Carl Deal and Tia Lesson are the Oscar-nominated filmmakers who made this film. Karen Ranucci, the producer of Democracy Now!. My colleagues, Jeff Stouch and Dennis Moynihan, and they represent this amazing community of Democracy Now! Family, current and past, that have made this daily news hour, what we call News with a Heart, possible. I am so amazed to be here. When I was asked to speak at Mind the Gap, I said, they know about my personal life. I am a subway aficionado, lover in New York City. And to hear Zoe talk about where this came from. In New York, everywhere it says Mind the Gap. And I travel with my little pup, who you'll see in the film. By the way, steal this story, please, is going to be tomorrow at BAMPFA at 3:30 and Monday in San Rafael in the afternoon. And I hope you all see it. Carl and Tia are amazing in what they have done. But every day I am with my little pup, her name is Zazu Goodpup. She's my dogter, and I am her dogma. And we travel the subway in New York, and every day as we are going onto the subway, I say, "Mind the gap, Zazu." Zazu is named for the Nazi-fighting, jazz and loving anti-Nazi youth of occupied France. And they would go to the nightclubs to hear jazz and swing. They would be targeted by the Nazis, and they were the freedom fighters. Zazu's a freedom fighter. But so that's Mind the Gap. I say it to her every single day. And then, spoiler alert, in the film, you will hear my beloved colleague, co-host, Nermeen Sheikh, talk about what our job is, our mission. It's to expand the frame so that you hear the people that are marginalized, that are often on the margins. Now, I really do think that those who care about war and peace, those who care about racial, economic, social equality, those who care about LGBTQ issues, who care about the fate of the planet, the environment, are not a fringe minority. They're not even a silent majority. They are the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take the media back. Now, that has been our goal from the beginning of Democracy Now! Okay, it was a pretty good beginning, 1996, 9 community radio stations beginning right here in the Bay Area with KPFA, right? Our beloved KPFA. Started in 1949 by a war resister, Lou Hill, who came out of the detention camps and said, there's got to be a media outlet that is not run by corporations, but by journalists and artists. And that's how Pacifica was born. As the late George Gerbner, founder of the Cultural Environment Movement, dean at the Annenberg School of Communication, said, a media not run by corporations that have nothing to tell and everything to sell that are raising our children today. So KPFA, first station, 1949. KPFK, second station in LA, 1959. My station in New York, WBAI, where I got my start, 1960. 1970, WPFW, Jazz and Justice Radio in Washington, D.C. That was in 1977. 1970, the fourth Pacifica station, KPFT in Houston, Texas, the Petro Metro, right? It goes on the air in the spring of 1970. Within a few weeks, the Klan strapped dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it up. So they get back on their feet. A few weeks later, they rebuild it. And I think it was right in the middle of Arlo Guthrie singing Alice's Restaurant. They blew it up again with 15 times the dynamite. And I think Alice's Restaurant is a great song. But anyway, then it took them months. January 71, Arlo Guthrie comes back to finish his song on the radio. And KPFT has been on the air ever since. Now, I can't remember if it was the Exalted Cyclops or the Grand Dragon, because I often confuse their titles. But he said it was his proudest act. I think that's because he understood how dangerous Pacifica was. You know, Democracy Now! Comes out of Pacifica Radio, though we are now independent. He understood how dangerous Pacifica was because Pacifica Radio, Democracy Now! Provides a forum for people to speak for themselves. And when you hear someone speaking from their own experience, whether it's a Palestinian child or an Israeli grandmother, whether it is an uncle in Iraq or an aunt in Afghanistan, you start to understand where they're coming from. And I didn't say agree with what you hear. I mean, how often do we agree with our family members, right? You may sometimes say, I want to kill my grandfather, my uncle, my mother, my father, but you don't mean it. I think this is really important. It makes it much less likely that you'll want to destroy that person, right? It breaks down the stereotypes and the caricatures that fuel the hate groups like the KKK. That is why I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Instead, all too often, it is wielded as a weapon of war. And that's why we have to take the media back. Now, it not only, as Noam Chomsky so often said, manufactures consent for war by bringing you the warmongers on TV. And you know, I'm not just talking about generals and colonels, because the fact is, many military officials do not agree with going to war, but they don't bring you those people. They bring you the people who are explaining the rationale, whether it is, whether we're invading Iraq or what happened in Afghanistan as well. They bring you those that are not talking about being cautious or other ways of solving the problem. And I'm not just talking about people in the military. We need to hear from all of civil society, because in this nuclear age, the stakes are simply too high. If you're talking about destroying someone else, you're talking about destroying yourself, because we are all connected. So how do we challenge that? It is an independent media. Now, I am the first to be critical of the corporate media, as everybody knows, right? Corporations that bring you the information that are there to make a profit. But now, in this day and age that we are in, what President Trump has done, to say the least, attacking the media, what he has done is, as opposed to going after the most vulnerable at the bottom, he has gone to the very top at the beginning, right? Attacking ABC, attacking CBS. And I am very critical of the commercial networks. But it is very efficient, right? He goes after ABC for George Stephanopoulos saying that Trump was civilly liable for rape. Now, no court would have allowed this to move forward because when he was found guilty of sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll, the judge said, in common parlance, that would be known as rape. So, of course, ABC, owned by Disney, could have defended this. But they had something much more important for them. They wanted a corporate merger. The news is a tiny part of their division, and that's not what makes the money. With the media consolidation we know today, they wanted to make the $6 billion deal that they were going for. So they compromise. They go on bended knee and they pay $15-16 million to Trump. CBS, which is owned by ultimately Paramount, wanting to make a deal with Skydance, which is owned by Trump allies, the Ellisons, Larry and David Ellison. Trump goes after 60 Minutes, the flagship news program of CBS, because he didn't like the way they edited, not that he saw the original interview, an interview with Kamala Harris. We edit all the time. You do an hour interview, you have time for 7 minutes, you edit it. So of course it would have been thrown out. But they had something much more important to them, and that is to make this massive profit from a corporate merger, and that has to be approved by the federal government, by the Trump administration. And so they cave, and they too pay $15 million, $16 million to President Trump. And then, of course, because he had beat ABC, he goes after Kimmel, right? He goes after this comic, and they want this corporate merger to be approved. And so they take Kimmel off the air. They suspend him indefinitely. But here's the hope, man. This is the hope, is people fought back. They revolted all over the country. And Disney was forced, which owns ABC, to put Kimmel back on the air. Not the stations, because a quarter of the stations were owned by the very conservative Sinclair Broadcasting and also Nexstar, which also wants to have a corporate merger approved by the Trump administration. They wouldn't put him back on their affiliates, about a quarter of the affiliates that he was on. But people revolted, and these corporations need the advertising money. That's what it's all based on. And so they caved too, and they went back on the air. They put Kimmel back. That was the resistance. And of course, it's important to talk about Jimmy Kimmel because he represents so many others, and they're not, in fact, so funny. People like Mario Guevara, who is the remarkable Spanish language broadcaster, Emmy award-winning broadcaster. I don't even know today if he was deported to El Salvador, but he was broadcasting, live streaming a No Kings rally over 100 days ago, and ICE went after him for committing the crime of journalism. And that's why it's important from the grassroots to the top to pay serious attention to all of this. We need to hear from the movements of this country and the movements around the world, because I do think they represent the majority. It is our job to go to where the silence is. And in fact, it's not always so quiet, right? People are organizing, they're rallying, they're shouting, they're demanding change. It just doesn't hit the corporate media radar. And so the media landscape is really changing. That is the opportunity right now. And I hope that Democracy Now! Is a model of that kind of change. It is women-led. It is journalists who deeply care about equality in this country and around the world. We no borders, covering stories that people are dealing with, whether in the United States, in Palestine, in Israel, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Sudan. We are all dealing with the same issues when you hear people at the grassroots talking about what is going on. It is absolutely critical at this point, when we talk about stealing this story, please. I mean, I have to say it is very unusual to be the subject of this documentary. I actually could not bear it when Tia and Carl and Karen came to me and said this, you know, already being on the air every day, but I actually am in a small room that is surrounded by, it is the wallpaper or bookshelves of this room, and that's the way I grew up. So when I am nervous speaking in front of people, people say, what are you talking about? Millions of people watch every day. I said, yeah, but not in the room I'm in. I'm completely alone. But, you know, to see folks this morning, the directors, the writers, to see the casting directors. We've expanded the frame a little to one of the subjects, but I'm just one part of this film. It's really the story of Democracy Now! Getting out there and taking that microphone and pointing it in a different direction. You know, in 2016, Democracy Now! Was a little late to this story, but it was the largest gathering of indigenous people we have seen in this country in eons, in decades, and that was the standoff at Standing Rock. And it was April 1st, 2016, that the late, great, unofficial historian of the Standing Rock Sioux, LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, invited people in North Dakota to come to her property to fight the Dakota Access Pipeline. And she thought a couple dozen people would come. She'd provide food. They could set up their teepees or their tents, and they would take on what they felt was such a tremendous threat, not only to the reservation, but to the 17 million people downstream the Missouri River, the largest river in North America, and that was the possibility of a spill from the Dakota Access Pipeline, but also what it represented, and that is a carbon-fueled economy. And instead of a couple dozen people, hundreds and thousands of people came to North Dakota. They were indigenous people from Latin America, from the United States, First Nations, from Canada, and their non-native allies, and they gathered, they set up resistant camps. We were covering it from afar in New York, but then we went out there Labor Day weekend. This was in the middle of the election of ultimately President Trump. The first time around, he was going against Hillary Clinton. All the debates, they never even raised the issue of climate change, let alone the largest indigenous gathering this country had seen in years. And at Democracy Now!, if you tune in, you know we are obsessed with this issue. I thank Bill Moyers, the late, great Bill Moyers, who came to us in 2009, said, why aren't you at the UN Climate Summit? And we started that year at Copenhagen, and we've never missed a climate summit since. Even during the pandemic, we worked with AP and Reuters to ensure we heard voices from those climate summits. In fact, it's how Tia and Carl begin the film, as we try to chase the truth, although he was far from representing the truth. You all have to see this film tomorrow to understand. But we covered it from afar, then went Labor Day weekend. We saw a whole group of people going to what they called their, it was a sacred ground of indigenous people who were buried there, and a judge was going to rule in a few days whether the Dakota Access Pipeline could dig it up. So in order to counter that, DAPL, as it's known, was digging it up then so it would become moot when the judge Friday was going to rule. So all these people came, we were there with the Democracy Now! Crew and a camera, and went on to this land that they were digging up, and there were 6 There were 6 bulldozers. They are scary. These are earth-crushing bulldozers that were digging up the land. Little girls, women, men, boys, in their traditional garb were standing in front of them. And the bulldozers pulled back, which to their credit. And then the guards pulled out dogs to go after the protesters. They didn't call themselves protesters, they called themselves water resistors. And we were filming. They were biting. We showed a dog, and I love dogs. By the way, Jane Goodall recently said, we just lost last week, Jane Goodall said, it's not chimpanzees she loves the most, it's dogs. But these dogs were trained to bite, and probably more, sadly. And we were showing a dog with its nose and snout dripping with blood. And this is indigenous blood. And here we were with all this footage. We posted it online. We had to go back to New York. We would cover it from there. And the judge was going to rule on Friday. And so on Thursday, they called out the National Guard. They knew this was going to be serious, the North Dakota authorities. Friday, Nermeen and I went after the show to Toronto, to the Toronto International Film Festival, because there was a film about I.F. Stone, the great muckraking journalist. And they were looking at organizations like I.F. Stone started with his weekly, and they focused a little on Democracy Now!, and they asked us to come and speak after the film. I.F. Stone, who said to a group of students, if you can remember 2 words, remember governments lie. And if you can possibly remember 3 words, remember all governments lie. And so we were there, and I was speaking at University of Toronto, and I looked at my phone, it said, you're under arrest. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know that on Thursday when they called out the National Guard, they issued an arrest warrant for me. I didn't know that. We didn't flee the U.S. because I didn't know. But I thought, what is this? I thought one of the students at the university had hacked my phone. So I looked down, but I saw it was a North Dakota number. And I looked up and I said, could someone call me a cab? Because I thought, I don't know if this is real, but I better get back into the United States. You don't get arrested automatically if there's an arrest warrant, but if you're dealing with FBI or border guards or something, then you might. I wanted to get back home. We headed back home. It was real. And we knew we had to go back to North Dakota because I wanted to ensure, especially young journalists who want to go and cover this epic gathering, that they shouldn't be intimidated. This wasn't about me. This was about a warning to all journalists, do not come to North Dakota, which is why we all had to be there. So we headed back to North Dakota, and as I landed, I called my North Dakota lawyer, not that I had one before, and I said, what's happening? And they said, well, they've dropped the misdemeanor charge. I said, oh, thank God. He said, they've elevated to a felony charge, I said, riot. I said, riot? I mean, I am a one-woman riot? What are they talking about? I mean, I like to think of myself as a little funny, but what? It's not that kind of riot that I was going to be put in jail for. And I said, how much time would I face? And he said, it's not horrendous. You might, a year maybe in jail. So I don't know about your life, but a year matters. So I said, how much time do I have? He said, 3 days before they indict, before you'll be arraigned. So we covered the protest for 3 days. And then Dennis, my colleague, brought in a broadcast truck from Minneapolis. We broadcast across from the court and the jail with the 10 Commandments in between. You have to be there at all times so that you can see this kind of thing. I interviewed the chair of the Standing Rock Sioux, at the time, Dave Archambault, and I said, have you ever been arrested? He said, yes, for civil disobedience. I said, what'd they do to you? He said, they strip search you, they put you in an armed jumpsuit, and you're jailed. And I'm going, not that it was just a personal thing for me, strip search you, Jesus. Then I asked Dr. Sarah Jumping Eagle, the pediatrician of the Standing Rock Sioux, were you ever arrested? She was among the first because she was standing up for the young people on the reservation, and she cared about the polluting not only of their land, but of the planet. And she said, yeah, they strip searched me, put me in an orange jumpsuit, and they jailed me. How much humiliation can a people take when they are standing up for all of us? So at the end of the show, we're about to go across the street to be arraigned. Many Indigenous people came to show their solidarity. I got a call from North Dakota Public Radio, who, an anchor who'd been there for decades, knew everyone, said, the judge is not going to dare sign off on this. It's not happening. And so I said, really? The fact is, because I'm a journalist, this was streaming on the homepage of the New York Times. We're on BBC Vogue magazine, and there is no reason for Vogue to be covering this. But they all were there, and international news organizations. This is what happens when the media shines a spotlight in the right direction. It was not only me that the charges were dropped against, but Indigenous people who were coming to court that day had their felonies and misdemeanors dismissed. This is the kind of reality TV and radio that we all must support, that we all must demand, especially when it comes to broadcast, because they are using the public airwaves. So I really want to thank Mill Valley Film Festival. I've never been here, and at one of MVFF's annual events. What an honor it is to be here as you near your 50th anniversary. It's absolutely amazing. I'm so thrilled that this film will get out there. The idea, we are not exclusive. We hope that when you hear someone on Democracy Now!, that you will take this story, go with it, tell a friend. If it's the media, steal this story, please. That is the whole point. We call it trickle-up journalism. Thank you so much.
Amy, thank you so much. You are an inspiration.
Will you come back next year?
Yeah, expanding the frame to dogs.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. This concludes this portion of the summit, and we hope you will join us for lunch. As we did announce earlier, there are about 15 lunches available, so if you want to stay, you can purchase a ticket in the inside in that hospitality area. And otherwise, I want to thank so much all the panelists and our moderators. Thank you to Zoe.
Thank you to you.
And thanks for coming.